Okay, I was on my way back to Saskatchewan where I had a job offer. So I just finished the Healing Our Spirit AIDS conference in BC, and I was on my way back to Saskatchewan. When I got back to Saskatchewan, there was a development. Jean Chrétien ended up visiting Saskatchewan, talking about different things. So I got together with some friends that I made there and started following Jean Chrétien around the city, trying to get time to talk to the Prime Minister of Canada about the National AIDS Strategy. Well, I wasn't successful at getting him to stop, but I did gain the attention of his security detail, who ended up pulling me in and asking me what I was doing and what was going on. And I told them it was I'm trying to get to speak with Jean Chrétien about the National AIDS Strategy because it needs to be renewed. And they said that they would bring that up to him if I agreed to stop following them around. So I agreed to stop following them around, and I'm hoping that that had some impact on the fact that the National AIDS Strategy was eventually renewed. So I was living my life in Saskatchewan, and then there came a day where I had this overwhelming need to call George. I knew he was in the hospital, so I called the hospital and asked to speak to him, and he got on the phone, and I talked to him. I talked to him for about 5 minutes, and then he said he really needed to visit with his family because his family was in the room, so he hung up. The next day, I got a call from his mother telling me that 5 minutes after I called, he had slipped into a coma and died that morning. I was so lucky to have called him what I did. Not lucky. I just give thanks to my ancestors for making me call him to have that long last conversation with him before he died. And then after that, up until that point, I had not been drinking at all. I had stopped drinking, and I was trying to follow more of a traditional path. And so I went out with my friends who I was traveling around with, chasing around Jean Chrétien, and we went to a bar, and they had never known me to ever have a drink of alcohol. So I got to the bar, I ordered a double scotch on the rocks and drank that, and I ordered a double scotch on the rocks, and then my friends looked at me and said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" I said, "Look, the one thing that I agreed to with my friend is he wanted an Irish wake. So now that he's gone, I need to drink." So I splashed some of that alcohol in the bar and drank the rest and ordered another and ended up getting really drunk and talking about my friend and remembering my friend and remembering how we were friends and how important that was in my life. So I ended up drinking for George. So I was living in Saskatchewan. The job never did materialize, but I met some more people and dated some friends and dated some people. And one of the people that I dated for a minute, we dated, but with him there was this fear of HIV. And of course, if you're scared of HIV, I can't date you. I can't live with that kind of fear. Like, understanding the fear of HIV is one thing, but living with that fear in your bedroom is a totally other level. of living and dealing with that fear. And that's something I refuse to do. And this is a conversation we had. So a few weeks later, this friend who I was dating for a minute was having a birthday. So he invited me to his birthday, and while I was at his birthday celebration, he came to me and he said, "Listen, there's somebody I want you to meet." And it was somebody else that was living with the virus. His name was Earl. And so he introduced me to Earl, and when Earl and I looked at each other, there was this immediate, intense physical attraction for each other. So Earl took one look at me and he said, "You're coming home with me tonight." And I said, "Good enough." So we ended up hooking up and continued to hook up for some time. And then the day came where I was in the ID infectious disease clinic, and Dr. Williams diagnosed me with full-blown AIDS. So that was a pretty hard thing to deal with at that time, being diagnosed full-blown, and I wasn't ready to start taking medication or anything. So I ended up at the bar Divas in Saskatoon later on that night, and Earl came in and he looked at me and said, "What's wrong?" I said, "Nothing. Nothing's wrong." And he said, "There's something wrong with you. Tell me what it is." I said, "I don't want to ruin your night." He said, "Just tell me what it is." I said, "I was just diagnosed full blown." And then he started to cry. And he sat there and cried for a while. And then he looked at me and he said, "I'm taking you home to meet my stepdad." And I said, "Okay, let's go." He said, "Well, let's finish drinking first." So we finished drinking, and then around 3 in the morning, we ended up on our way out to Sturgeon Lake Reserve. When we got to Sturgeon Lake, we ended up at his sister Judy's house. And we went in and we laid down together on the couch with me in the back and, him in the front, me holding on to him. And a few hours later, around 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, a bunch of kids were jumping all over us. Here we were, two men spooning on the couch. And for these kids, this was perfectly normal. So they were jumping all over us and really happy to see their mushroom Earl. And then Judy came down, and it was amazing how normal it was. For these kids to see two men, which I don't think they've ever seen their Uncle Earl with somebody before, but of course they knew he was two-spirited and knew what that meant. So they were just really happy to see their mushroom Earl. So that was a very eye-opening experience for me, because in Judy's house there was no homophobia, there was no be careful what the kids see, there was none of that. So it was a very refreshing thing, and that was a good thing. And of course, the reason Earl came to his sisters first is because we had to sober up first before we met the old man and his mom. So the next day, he took me over to meet his stepfather, and later on that day, I ended up in my first sweat lodge ceremony. with that old man. And Kokum, the old lady. And we ended up going, and it was I felt very connected in that sweat lodge. I felt very at home in that sweat lodge. And he recognized that. And later he came up to me and he said, "You seem very comfortable in there." I said, "Yes." I said, "That was the first time I was ever in a sweat lodge." He said, "I know." He said, "But you embraced our ways in a way that I've never seen a person who came from another place come into one of our ceremonies and embrace our ways so readily." So he ended up giving me an eagle feather. It was a tail feather of an eagle. And he gave that to me and he said, "Keep that on the rear view mirror of your truck. And if you don't have a vehicle at the time, pin it above your bed. That feather will watch over you and take care of you." That feather today is not much more than a stem. All the feathery parts have fallen off in the wind and over the years, and pretty much still just a stem. But I keep that stem there and I keep it hanging on my rearview mirror because that old man gave me that feather to keep me safe. So then it came a time that I didn't know what to call him. I didn't know how to address him, and we talked about that. And then a little while after that, we were in a sweat lodge, and he looked at me and he said, "You can call me Notawe now. That's what you can call me." So it took me a while to remember that word, and then once I started remembering that word, I started calling him Notawe. And then I was in a conversation with my Nistao. That means brother-in-law. And he told me the old man had adopted me as his son. I said, "When was that?" He said, "Maybe I never should have said anything." He said, "It was about 3 weeks ago. He adopted you as a son in the sweat lodge." I said, "Oh." I said, "That's why he told me to call him Notawe." He said, "Yeah." He said, normally that old man wouldn't be able to adopt somebody who has a father. But because your father threw you away," and he was referring to the story about my dad coming out to the truck and telling me that I needed to go and find a place to die because I wasn't willing to do it. I wasn't welcome to do it in Nova Scotia and embarrass him within his church. So that old man interpreted that as my father throwing me away. So he was able to adopt me as a son because my dad threw me away. So he adopted me as his son and treated me as his son and honored me as his son, taught me as his son. But he didn't teach me Cree ways. What he did was he convinced my ancestors to teach me in ancestral ways, because those ancestral ways were the ways in that sweat lodge that when I was with him in that sweat lodge, the ways that I connected to so deeply were ancestral ways, which are very big in a lot of my history, in a lot of my story. Because, of course, with Irish ancestry and Norse ancestry, there's a lot of ancestral ways, within these societies. So that connection to the ancestral ways was very strong within me. And of course, as a Jackatar, that connected me to, again, back to the Irish, because the Jacktars were the Irish Indigenous service who dove off the boats into the waters off of Newfoundland and swam to shore to swim out of slavery. And then those Irish indentured servants made families with the Beothic women who were on the shore, which were the Red Indians of Newfoundland. And of course, they also had Viking ancestry because the Vikings, there was two landings in Newfoundland, one in around 900 or something AD, and then again in 1200 or 1100. So the Vikings were there before Cabot arrived in 1495 or whenever it was that he arrived there. So that lineage was already there as well. So there was ancestral ways there as well. So I connected very deeply with those ancestral ways, and I give thanks to that old man for pleading with my ancestors to teach me my ways, the ways that live within my blood memories and live within my DNA, to help me connect with a spiritual way that was practiced by Neanderthal man. So a very old spiritual ways. So as I was getting to know the old man, I knew that there was things. When I left for Nova Scotia way back when to go see George, I didn't take everything with me. Some of the things I left in Vancouver. So I ended up applying for a scholarship to speak at an AIDS conference that was happening in BC. So I put together an abstract and submitted that abstract, and that abstract got accepted. And that conference sent me the money to be able to travel to BC. So the old man said, "Okay, we'll go to BC," because he said, "I'd like to see the ocean anyway. I've never seen the ocean." So we went. So we got in his. Well, he bought new tires and new winter tires because it was in the winter time that this conference was happening, and we ended up going to BC for that AIDS conference. While I was in BC at that AIDS conference, we stopped in and around Kamloops, and there was a lady there who had been waiting for a really long time to meet him, and we stopped and he talked to her, and then we got into Vancouver, and there was different people that wanted to see him, so we went around visiting the different prisons while I went to the AIDS conference. And one day he came with me to the AIDS conference and he was getting really bored, and I said, "Do you want to do something else?" He said, "What?" I said, "We can go down by the docks, go down on the docks and look at some of the boats." Now you're talking. So we went down and looked at the boats, and we seen a boat with a helicopter on and a helicopter pad. And he said, "Take my picture," he said. "I'll tell everybody that this is my boat with a helicopter on it." So we got a picture of him in the boat with the helicopter on it. And we finished up the things around BC that I had to do, and then we were on our way back. And on our way back, we stopped at Elbow, which is minimum security prison. So we stopped at Elbow and went in for a sweat. And I went in with them into the prison and went to the sweat there at Elbow. And after that sweat, we got some smoked salmon, but it was liquid smoked salmon in a bottle. First time I ever had it. Oh my goodness, was it ever good. And that old man was he loved it. He thought it was the best thing ever. So we ate that liquid smoked salmon and after the sweat, and everything went well. And then we were on our way back to Saskatchewan. And that's really, this is when, so here I am in my traditional journey at the point where this old man has adopted me as his son and started teaching me. And, I'm living my life with Earl and his family and his mom and his sisters and brothers. And that was how I came into understanding traditional ways of knowing, doing, and being, ancestral ways for me of knowing, doing, and being. Because my connection to ancestral ways were different. See, that old man never taught me Cree ways. As I said earlier, he taught me how to connect with my ancestors, to learn ancestral ways from my ancestors. He told me, he said, I can't teach you Cree ways. I can't interpret your dreams. There's so many things I can't do. Because he said, I'm a prairie person. I live on the prairies, and all of my teachings come from the prairies. You're from the Atlantic region, so a lot of your teachings are going to be influenced by the ocean and the different animals and fish that live in the ocean. So he said, it's going to be impossible for me to be able to help you interpret your dreams and things like that, because you're from the sea, you're from the ocean people. You're from the people by the ocean. And even the BC, the ocean, the Pacific Ocean in the BC, I really didn't connect. I wasn't able to connect with that ocean the way I connect with the North Atlantic. It's a very different thing. So that's my story. This is the fourth video, or maybe it's the third video. I don't know. I can't remember. I think it's the third video, and so there's one more video to come on this journey of mine to understand my traditional ways of knowing, doing, and being.